Ooh. Hello, YouTubers! My name's Willie. Welcome to my channel. Today I have reaction request 123. This is The Beast Arises Part 4. Now, this is part of Arch Warhammer's The Beast Arises lore series, based off of The Beast Arises books. So, yeah, and has been requested by CJ Falcon, so let's check this out. And play. Do-do. Do-do.
Greetings and salutations, friends. It's the first Friday of a new month. That means we're going to have a look at The Beast Arises. So, last time we looked at Book 3, now we are on to Book 4 of The Mighty Adventures of the Morphing Space Mushrooms. The last book ended with a bit of a cliffhanger, a massive orc attack moon suddenly popping into existence above Holy Terra itself. How the hell this is possible? Nobody knows. Essentially,
sounds like
just
Dead
assume
Space.
that the orcs use teleportation technology in a completely and utterly different way than pretty much anyone else uses it. They are supposedly using some form of warp travel, except it is vastly more advanced. They don't travel through the Immaterium, neither do they travel through the Webway. They just do this because orcs. And it's never really truly explained, so just throw it on the pile with all of the other MacGuffins that this series will throw at you. So, with that out of the way, the orc attack moon above Terra is considerably larger than the one destroyed at Port Sanctus, and that already inflicted considerable damage upon the Imperial Navy elements sent to destroy it. Interestingly enough, this attack moon does not appear to come with a naval element. There's no orc ships that have started deploying from the moon. It's just hanging there, inert. There's no sign of any orc deployments. There's no sign of any orc attack upon Holy Terra. It's just a gargantuan orc attack moon with a face carved into it, because of course there is, looking down at Terra. Unsurprisingly, the sudden appearance of a massive stellar body right above the goddamn Imperial planet did cause a little bit of an uproar. You know, the usual stuff that civilians do when they're getting frightened and panicky. Running around, screaming, throwing themselves to their death, starting fires, shooting each other, etc., etc. The local Adeptus Arbites were truly earning their pay at this point in time, and in many areas of Holy Terra, they had essentially just completely given up on controlling the crowds. Terra is a remarkably heavily populated planet, and it is also home, quote-unquote, to billions upon billions of pilgrims, who, very inconveniently, in the case of a mass panic, are usually gathered up in fairly small areas, you know, standing in day-long, if not month-long queues to get into various temples, etc. So, what happens when you take incredible numbers of people, throw in a gigantic, scary-looking moon that suddenly popped into orbit, and then you add in a light sprinkling of general panic with lots of futuristic firearms? Well, I think you get the general gist. And without the Imperial fists around, the task of maintaining law and order fell to the fairly limited garrison strength on Terra and the Adeptus Arbites. There's no clear mention of how large the garrison on Terra was, which is a little odd, because I'm pretty sure the entire garrison of Terra did not consist purely of the Imperial fists. There are, of course, also the Lucifer Blacks, but the Lucifer Blacks are far more of a bodyguard contingent, and at this point in history have pretty much degraded to a ceremonial honor guard, rather than the truly elite fighters that they once were. It is, however, relatively safe to assume that there must have been a relatively sizable garrison on Terra. One, because motherfucking Terra, and two, the civil disorder never became truly catastrophic. It did eventually threaten to become truly catastrophic, but at the moment it must have been curtailed in some way, and the Adeptus Arbites probably were not in a position to do so. To control the entirety of the civilian population on Terra would almost certainly have required the deployment of garrison elements. Imagine, for example, let's do a microcosm of this. Let's say that the entire city of New York went completely batshit insane with fear. Something horrible happened, like, for example, they got another flash of Britney Spears' Minge, for example, and everyone flies into a complete panic-driven rage of despair and hopelessness, throwing themselves off buildings, robbing, looting, murdering, attacking, etc., etc. What the fuck could the police department of New York City do against this? Very, very, very fucking little in all due reality. Because, again, let's wheel it back one more moment and put that in perspective. New York City has about 8.5 million inhabitants. That's quite a lot of people. But it's fucking nothing compared to a hive city. Absolutely goddamn nothing. And out of those 8.5 million, only about 50,000 are employed by the police department. And of course, not all of those are going to be actual police officers. Quite a few of those are also going to be administrative personnel. In other words, the police officers are going to find themselves remarkably heavily outnumbered. And granted, the police, quote-unquote, of the 41st millennium are considerably more violent than those of our current world, and this would certainly help them in gaining control. After all, if a dude is pointing a gun at you and you know that he might shoot you, you maybe still decide to push the limits just a little bit. But if the dude is clad head to toe in riot armor and is pointing a combat shotgun at you in the 41st millennium, where you are painfully aware that your life is worth diddly fucking shit, you're probably gonna give up. But of course, even then, it's a simple mathematical problem, isn't it? Let's be very generous, and say that each Adeptus Arbites could cover like 100 people. There's still going to be a couple thousand people running amok. And while, mind you, there are mentions of large-scale civil unrest throughout the books, none of it is really presented as truly catastrophic, and you would think that if the population of a planet that contains billions upon billions, or hell, tens upon tens upon tens of billions of civilians, all panicked, there probably would be some large-scale problems, and it would probably show rather quickly. But the books make no mention of it being a huge problem until way further out. Now, granted, we are mostly seeing this from the perspective of the upper classes of Imperial Society, from the High Lord, so maybe there are very large-scale uprisings going on, but even then, the degree of just complete and utter glossing over the books do in relation to this suggests to me that they must have been put down, if not effectively, then at the very least temporarily. However, this of course still leaves the absolutely tiny little problem of a goddamn orc Death Star orbiting Terra. And as usual, the High Lords are not being particularly useful in this regard. The Imperial Navy is scattered everywhere. Most of its forces is currently in Port Sanctus and cannot be pulled back to Terra in time. The Imperial Guard, if there is regiments on Terra, which I assume there has to be some, granted a fair few of them were sent off to help the Imperial Fists in the original incursion, but, I mean, there has to be some, but again, they are probably quite busy trying to retain a semblance of law and order across the planet, so they won't be of a whole lot of use either. Not to mention, of course, they can't actually get to the attack moon, because that would require spaceships. This means that, in all due essentiality, Terra is essentially defenseless in front of this orc attack moon. The Imperial Fists are gone, the Imperial Guard regiments were in large part sent to assist said fists, and what remains are almost certainly entirely paralyzed by trying to maintain law and order. It's a fairly bad situation.
Fairly.
Meanwhile, the High Lords are busy sharing out the blame, placing most of it, of course, on High Admiral Lansung for fucking up so magnificently, killing the one Orc attack moon near Port Sanctus, then returning ahead of his entire fleet, only to land to a triumphant return and wonderful, wonderful, glorious jubilee, and then poof, Orc attack moon over Terra. And so, in a mere moment so tiny it can be compared to CNN's trustworthiness, Lansung's unassailable position turned to shit. And with the High Lord's one and only leader figure transformed into a blubbering mess of failure and apoplectic uselessness, the High Lords return to what they do best, bickering like little children. Grandmaster Vangerich sums up the whole situation quite well when he thinks to himself that, oh dear orcs, just give us a little bit more time and we'll finish ourselves off for you. But then, a glimmer of light in the darkness. The High Lord of Merchant Shipping, one Jaskina Tull, steps to the fore and presents the council with her brilliant plan of action. She wishes to recall all of her merchant vessels, seeing as she is essentially in command of every single merchant vessel within the Imperium, and she wishes to call back anyone that can reach Terra relatively quickly and gather them up into a grand armada. Then, she wishes to cram as many civilians and whatever Imperial Guard regiments can be spared onto said ships and ram them into the Orc attack moon. What could possibly go wrong with this plan?
Nice.
It is dubbed the Proletarian Crusade, due to the fact that most of the people that are going to be rammed aboard these vessels are going to be civilians. The civilians are then going to be disgorged en masse onto the Orc attack moon, where they will do... well, I'm not entirely sure, actually. I presume they will try to overwhelm the Orcs with sheer numbers and kill them off that way. A outcome I consider to be about as likely as there is to be hentai being drawn about an emperor penguin. Oh. Wait. Fuck. Alright, bad example. I underestimated the internet again. Anyways, while all of this is going on, Grandmaster Vangerich is once again sitting near the back of the room in one of these small council chambers and thinking to himself,
give me 10 minutes.
By the Emperor, we're actually going to do it. We are actually going to help the Orcs finish ourselves off.
Sweet.
There is, however, a small bright spot, namely that the Imperium are not the only ones that are having a bit of trouble with the space mushrooms. The Iron Warriors are also struggling a bit with their own infestations of Orky-Borkies. An Iron Warrior Great Company is soundly defeated and sent running back into orbit on one of their fortress worlds. These fortress worlds were created by the Iron Warriors after the failure of the Horus Heresy. They were not anywhere near as fond of chaos as the rest of their friendlies. In fact, they considered anyone that fell to chaos to be themselves weak. They abhor the stigmata of corruption, and consider it to be a failure on the part of the warrior that acquires such a corruption. And such, heading into the Eye of Terror, was really not an option for them. So they scattered themselves across the galaxy, building fortress worlds, building up stocks of slaves, essentially enslaving the entire population to act both as a means of producing food and resources, and also to be a militia. An Iron Warrior fortress world is, unsurprisingly, very, very heavily defended, but not heavily defended enough to stop the Orcs.
Yeah.
They did, however, manage to escape into orbit, but what at first appeared to be Iron Warrior's reinforcements turned out to be a second great company that was currently fleeing from a Black Templars crusade straight into the next battle zone. They had been running towards salvation, but that salvation was currently being invaded by greenskins, so not a whole lot of success there. Indeed, most of the planets in the core word sectors had been attacked in one way or another. The Blood Angels had themselves destroyed another attack moon, and there were reinforcements on the way from other chapters. The Iron Hands had sent 3 companies to Terra, but they were months away and they had their own Orc problems to deal with. Other reinforcements like the Ultramarines, the White Scars, were even further away. and were unlikely to get to Terra in time, and most definitively, they were not going to be getting to Terra in time to stop any attacks launched by the attack moon currently fucking orbiting the planet. However, the turnout for the Proletarian Crusade was, well, massive. The people on Terra needed something to latch onto, some form of hope to calm themselves down, since, they were pretty much rioting all across the planet at this point. The Proletarian Crusade was delivered with enough gusto, enough power, and enough good old-fashioned oratory to calm the masses and even convince them that they might actually have a chance. Participation in the crusade was, in all due technicality, voluntary, mostly because there were more than enough people volunteering. The Imperial propaganda machine was in full swing. Duscina Tull, the creator of this rather lunatic plan, was everywhere, on posters, on vid screens, on absolutely everything, calling out to the Imperial citizen to take up arms, to become heroes and save the Imperium, all that good yik-yacky nonsense. And while, of course, there was no time to actually train these volunteers in anything but the absolute most bare-boned basic, e.g., this is a las rifle, it goes pew-pew when you pull the trigger, and if it stops going pew-pew, you should probably switch out the ammunition. But on the bright side, there was more than enough weapons to go around. Terra, of course, had been stockpiled in the occasion of a long siege, and normally there would be a hell of a lot more Imperial Guard, Adeptus Astartes, and even other Administratum forces stationed on the planet. So there were plenty of las rifles and other weapons to go around, and these were handed out to the new volunteers, along with the briefest of explanations on how to actually use them. Furthermore, in an attempt to turn the disorganized mob into something that might actually be marginally useful, veteran personnel from the few Imperial Guard regiments that belonged on Terra were spread out across the Proletarian Crusade, something along the lines of 1 Imperial Guardsman per 50-odd civilians, in an attempt to enforce some kind of order upon this unruly mob. Whether or not it was entirely successful, well, we'll see about that.
That's a whole nother matter.
The Imperial Guard regiments and the forces that remained after they had been scattered out through these units were gathered up into command squads and sent to support specialized detachments. There was a fair bit of armor, for example, still available, and generally speaking, the actual soldiers would be centered in and around the gathering armored formations. As for the Proletarian Crusade's delivery methods, well, first, they were transported up into orbit by every single orbit-capable craft available, and then loaded onto a wide variety of merchant vessels, the vast majority of which were essentially just bulk transports, ore haulers, and other merchant vessels, not designed to take passengers. However, whatever holding facilities were available were cleaned out of the usual equipment and just turned into massive open containers, which were then filled full of humans. This was very, very ineffective, to put it excessively bluntly, but it is something. The Imperial Guard troops were mostly placed aboard bulk transports, a few of which still remained in the Terran system, and the Orc attack moon had not bothered to actually attack any of the more or less Imperial Navy elements that actually remained. So these were, of course, considerably better armed and armored, or well, armed. They had a few basic turrets, but at least they had some armor, which the merchant haulers most definitively did not. The plan, in all due essentiality, was to gather all of this up into one massive ball, then place the shittier merchant vessels in front of the bulk haulers, and then just simply dash madly towards the Orc attack moon. The theory, of course, being that while the overwhelming majority of civilians would die not screaming, because, vacuum, then maybe some of the bulk haulers would get through, and if they were really lucky, maybe some of the civilian meat shields would get through as well. It certainly was not the most promising of plans, but again, you might wonder, how the hell was this even considered a plan to begin with? Well, you have to remember that at this point, the people of Terra were grasping at straws. They were looking for anything at all that could possibly save them, some way to regain their own agency in a situation that seemed hopeless. The Orc attack moon had rendered them helpless. They were in a situation where they had no way to affect the outcome of any of this. They had been completely separated from their own agency, and they would do anything to regain even the smallest measure of control over the situation. Additionally, bombarding the citizens with 24/7 propaganda everywhere at all times, on every TV channel, on every radio network, on every single broadcast, all the time. Well, you know how the saying goes, if you shout something loudly enough for long enough, people are actually going to start believing it. So, with all of these crusaders gathered aboard their little tin cans, was there any Navy presence whatsoever? Not really. The only Imperial Navy vessel in the system that would have any chance whatsoever of doing anything was the High Admiral's own flagship, which was originally intended to lead the charge, but Grandmaster Vangerich, after having visited Langsung, had talked him out of it. Vangerich saw no reason to throw away the last potent warship in the solar system for this proletarian crusade, and in all due honesty, Langsung's flagship would not have done a damn diddly ding-dong shit to change the inevitable outcome. I know I'm kind of spoiling it here, but come on. You know what's going to happen as well as I do. Not to mention the fact that Langsung himself had withdrawn into a state of near-complete apoplexy. He had, essentially, doomed Terra. He had cleaned out the entire solar system of Imperial Navy vessels. There was simply nothing left to protect Terra, and that was his fault.
Yeah.
And unsurprisingly, being directly responsible for the biggest catastrophe to hit the Imperium since the fucking Horus Heresy does take a little bit of a toll on the psyche. And so,
maybe
with
just
everything, quote-unquote, prepared, the Proletarian Crusade was launched. Thousands of merchants and civilian vessels had gathered above Terra to attack the Orc Moon, and so they did. At which point the Orc Moon disgorged all of its ships, which at first seemed to not outright attack the merchant shipping. Instead, they would board the various merchant ships, using various cutting tools to cut open the improvised crew compartments, thereby venting most of the supposed fighting men out into the void. What had essentially happened here is that Juskina Tull's Grand Crusade had gathered up pretty much every single ship in the solar system, and then handed them to the Orcs on a silver fucking platter.
Yeah.
What few elements of the Proletarian Crusade actually reached the Orc planet was met by a relatively small force of Orcs, which they defeated, before being led into a trap. A very silly trap, which I refuse to mention, because retarded. Anyways, the small Orc force that was sent out onto the Orc attack moon surface, which, by the way, the attack moon has a atmosphere.
Huh.
Now, first and foremost, I'd like to ask how the fuck Juskina Tull knew about this, and secondly, what? An atmosphere? On a body that close to Terra? How the astrophysical fuck, but, oh well. Minor details.
Orcs.
Orc MacGuffin nonsense, whatever the fuck. The small force that had been sent onto
That's all that
the
needs to be
planetoid
said. It
surface
works because
were
orcs.
the dregs of the Orc invasion force, probably dissatisfied elements, you know, the rowdy little bastards that couldn't be properly controlled. They were just sent up to the surface to fight the humans and hopefully die, before then finishing off the rest of the humans in the retard Trap-O-Matic. Everyone dead except for one single survivor who stumbled her way into the Orc attack moon. A former Adeptus Arbites, armed only with a single shotgun and like 20 rounds of ammunition, against an entire attack moon that now proved itself to be filled to the fucking brim with Orcs. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that whole plan went about as badly as it could possibly have gone. Not only was the Orc attack moon entirely unscathed, its garrison barely touched by the invasion force, but Juskina Tull's great proletarian crusade had also saved them the trouble of actually going out into the solar system and hunting down the various merchant shipping. Instead, it had all been delivered directly to the Orc like so much fast food.
Yeah.
And the crazed woman who started all of this, Juskina Tull, was of course back on Terra, safe and sound, in the High Lord's chamber. Now, there were 2 emotional wrecks on the High Council. Oh,
Yeah.
fucking goody. The only real upside to all of this was that at least the High Admiral Lansung's own personal flagship, a powerful Emperor-class cruiser in its own right, had not been thrown away as well. But
Yeah.
wait, a spark of hope. The ship, the Militant Fire, one of the merchant vessels sent to attack the attack moon, came back to Terra after the defeat.
With
It
the
was
orcs
at
on it?
first considered a sign, a potion of faith and hope, a measure of retribution.
There's
At least
orcs on
one
it, isn't
ship
there?
had escaped. Until an orc stepped off the ship and presented himself as an emissary of all goddamn things.
What?
And I probably don't need to tell you that the orcs, generally speaking, don't use emissaries. Generally speaking, they don't use any diplomacy that is on a higher level than bash opponent overhead with stick. As such, the
Yeah.
appearance of a supposed diplomat was a wee bit shocking. To begin
I
with, the
imagine
natural
so.
reaction was shoot the goddamn thing, but Grandmaster Vangerit stepped in and had the creature brought before the High 12,
Wow.
figuring that at least they could listen to what the damn thing had to say. By all accounts, the orcs had the entirety of Terra by the balls. And you know what they
Yeah.
say, if something has you by the balls, you probably shouldn't piss on his wrist. The orc
Is
diplomat
that a thing?
presented the High 12
I didn't
with
know
an
that was an
ultimatum.
option.
They were to surrender Terra immediately and throw themselves upon the gentle mercies of the great beast, or they would be wiped out. The High Council, to their credit for once, suggested that the Orc emissary return back home to his great beast, find the biggest piece of blunt metal he could possibly find, and shove it up his arse. Probably the
Nice.
first halfway decent thing the Council had done to this point, as
Yeah.
becoming the Orcs' slaves would essentially be just an even more drawn-out, humiliating, and horrible way of death. Better to just get blasted into oblivion by a planetary bombardment rather than spend the next 6 or 7 years slaving for the smelly little greenskins, getting kicked by the goblins, and then finally eaten by one of the more brutish specimens of space fungus.
Nice.
And that pretty much brings the book to an end, although there is one other little interesting tidbit here. Apparently, the Inquisition has a stronghold under the polar ice caps of Terra, a massive inquisitorial fortress with a full garrison of its own and containing enough quarters and areas for inquisitors all over the planet to visit, live, research, and collect various data. An interesting little tidbit. And, of course, lastly, because I know you love them oh so much, we will end this one as well on a cliffhanger. After the Orc ambassador had been sent back home, Grandmaster Vangerit was brought a report. Eldar, of unknown numbers and origins, had appeared within the Imperial Palace.
What? Okay. Well, that was Arch Warhammers. The Beast Arises Part 4. If you want to go check out his stuff, there's a link in the description to help you find it. This was requested by CJ Falcon, so thank you for that, CJ. My thoughts on it. Well, we started out with where the cliffhanger that we originally had. There was now an attack moon hovering over Terra. And they made a makeshift militia to crusade to it and basically sacrificed all their ships and a lot of humans. And out of nowhere, the one of the ships comes back and it's like, hey, I'm an ambassador. And basically told everyone to surrender. And they were like, no. And then Eldar showed up. And so, another cliffhanger. And I wouldn't say a whole lot was learned. There's essentially one naval ship, and all the other ships that were worth anything were destroyed, I guess, along with a whole bunch of innocent, well, maybe not so innocent people. So, there's that. It's definitely getting interesting. Kind of loophole-y. Is that a word? Loophole-y. Full of exciting twists and turns. Anyways, Willie, out.
If you like the video, stay tuned for more content. And as always, feel free to comment. Have a good one.